Okay, so now we'll start the lymphatic system. So we've got 3 lectures to focus on the lymphatic system and immunity. By the end, you guys should be able to distinguish between the 2 different classes of defenses that we have to protect the body, specific defenses and non-specific defenses. We'll also kind of compare acquired versus innate immunity, and those go hand in hand. You should be able to talk about the role of lymphocytes in immune response, and we'll talk very specifically about the types of lymphocytes. So the types of T cells, types of B cells, the types of NK cells. You guys should also be able to describe the structure and function of each major component of the lymphatic system. So we'll talk about the thymus, the spleen, the lymph nodes, the lymphatic vessels. You guys should be really familiar with each different component of the lymphatic system, which is probably pretty new for you guys. Everybody is kind of familiar with the heart and the blood, but lymphatic's a little like out there. So it might take a little bit of like reading and just to get familiar with it. And then you guys should be able to list the body's non-specific defenses in a lot of detail. The whole last lecture is about non-specific defenses. So not the lymphocytes, but stuff like barriers, acid, mucus, fever, inflammation, the complement system, all of these non-specific things that help keep us free from disease. So if we're going to talk about the lymphatic system and immunity, we have to talk about pathogens. We have to have a clear understanding of what we mean by the word pathogen. A pathogen is just an organism that causes disease. Your textbook says microscopic organism that causes disease, but I would argue that there are some parasites that are not microscopic, they're rather large. So an organism that causes disease, I think, is a better explanation of what a pathogen is. So this could be any organism that causes disease. It could be something like a virus, which is extremely simple in the fact that it doesn't even have its own cellular machinery. It uses your cellular machinery. It's essentially just a bunch of genetic material. This could be bacteria, this could be fungus, this could be parasites, anything that gets in your body and has the ability to cause disease in some way, we could classify as a pathogen. When we talk about pathogens, we talk about the way that we try and avoid them and kill them and defend against them. And we do that with our lymphatic system and then different components of immunity. The lymphatic system includes all of the cells and tissues and organs that are responsible for defending the body. Okay? And they defend the body against lots of different things. We defend the body against all of these external pathogens. So bacteria that might get in, viruses that might get in, parasites that might get in. But we also defend the body against some internal, not invaders, but attackers as well. Frequently, our cells become dangerous. Okay? Our cells become cancerous cells much more than you would ever realize. It's just that the body defends against them before they become these big cancerous tumors that are pathogenic. Our cells become rogue cancerous cells. It's just a fact of life. And our immune system is responsible for destroying them before they cause problems. Also, the lymphatic system destroys toxins. These can be waste products, but also toxins that are made by pathogens. There are some bacteria that the bacteria themselves cause no problem whatsoever. It's the toxin that the bacteria makes that's harmful. A lot of bacteria actually work that way via toxins. Botulism, for example, is a botulinum toxin. So the lymphatic system will help to defend against those toxins as well. So when we say immunity, immunity is just the ability to resist infection or disease. And we'll talk about immunity in terms of innate immunity and acquired immunity. And that will relate directly to where we have here, innate defenses and adaptive or acquired defenses. So when we talk about the ability to resist infection, right? What does the body have and do to try and fight infection, to try and defend us? We have different classes of defenses. We have defenses that we call non-specific, and then we have specific defenses. Non-specific defenses are non-specific. They do the same thing no matter what they're fighting. They don't recognize an invader. They don't know, oh, I'm fighting this specific bacteria, or I'm fighting this specific virus. They have no idea what they're fighting. They do the same thing every time, no matter who it is that they're fighting. They do not distinguish one attack from another. We also call these innate defenses, and we say that these are responsible for innate immunity. When we say that something's innate, what does that mean? Born with it, right? It's innate. You have it, naturally have it. So these defenses you have when you're born. Okay, your skin, for example, is a phenomenal defense mechanism, right? It's a great barrier. You have that when you're born. You have the ability to have a fever, inflammation. All of these are protective things. You've got macrophages that work. You've got neutrophils. You've got eosinophils. These are all innate defenses that we're born with. Specific defenses are our lymphocytes. Specifically, we'll talk about the T cells and B cells being responsible for our specific defenses. And what we mean by specific is they are very specific. They recognize and attack and remember a specific pathogen. Okay, you have some T cells that will recognize only one very simple type of virus. That's it. That's what they recognize. And if they see it, then they multiply, they activate the army against that one specific invader, and then they fight it. And then they stay around and they remember it in case they see it again. They won't respond to anything else. That cell is against that one pathogen, period. They will not do anything against anyone else. They're very specific in who they attack and who they fight, who they remember. Hence calling it specific defenses. We say that these are adaptive defenses, or that they give us adaptive or acquired CC? Two C's?
No, one C.
Okay. I'm like, no. Acquired immunity. I swear I have a high IQ. They give us acquired or adaptive immunity. What that means is that we're not born with it. We have to acquire it. We have to get it in some way. We can get it in lots of different ways, and we'll talk about this later. You can get it from your mom. If your mom passes antibodies on you, you can get it artificially. We can inject antibodies in you. You can get it because we stimulate you with a vaccine. We can stimulate it with a vaccine, or you can get it the good old-fashioned way where you come in contact with a pathogen, you get sick, then your body learns how to fight it. But the point is you have to get it in some way. You're not just automatically born with it. All right, so we've really talked through that stuff in a ton of detail in the second and third lectures. We'll talk through lymphocytes and the exact ways that they work in more detail than you ever care to know. And then we'll talk through our non-specific defenses too. But first, we're gonna kind of take a really general tour of the lymphatic system. So the lymphatic system includes lymph. Lymph is the fluid that flows through lymphatic vessels. Very similar to blood, right? Blood is a fluid that flows through blood vessels. Lymph is a fluid that flows through lymphatic vessels. The key difference between the two is plasma proteins. And lymph does not have those plasma proteins present. Remember that lymph is going to originate as interstitial fluid. When we talked about capillary exchange, we said this was the blood in the capillary, this was the interstitial fluid. And we said we filter out a bunch and then we reabsorb some. And we don't reabsorb all of it, right? We've got about 3.5 liters that stay out here in the interstitial fluid. That ends up going into a lymphatic vessel as lymph. So essentially all the stuff that was in the blood that got filtered out can then enter as lymph. What does not get filtered out of the blood? Plasma proteins. So that's why the plasma proteins don't end up in the lymph, because they stay in the blood. Okay? But otherwise, it's pretty similar in composition. So fluid, ions, bacteria, pathogens will come out and enter into the lymphatic system, which that's what we want. We want the pathogens to get pulled in there. Lymphatic vessels or lymphatics are just vessels that carry lymph, right? Blood vessels are vessels that carry blood. Lymphatic vessels are vessels that carry lymph. We'll see that they actually originate out in the periphery, and then they all start to come together and combine, and then remember they end up here at the subclavian, where we'll see that they end up dumping the lymph back into the bloodstream. So they do originate as pockets, which is kind of original. Our circulatory system is not like that. Right, it's a circuit, it's continuous. The lymphatic system is not a continuous circuit. We'll talk about lymphoid tissues and lymphoid organs. These are somewhat similar to each other in that they're both made up of tissues that have a really high concentration of lymphocytes and other immune system cells like macrophages and mast cells, but really we see tons and tons of lymphocytes in both the lymphoid tissues and lymphoid organs. The key difference between these is that the lymphoid organs are a little bit more complex and that they have an outer capsule surrounding them. The tissue is literally just like a clump of open tissue with a bunch of lymphocytes, like reticular tissue that's then crammed with lymphocytes. The lymphoid organs actually have a capsule that surrounds them and separates that tissue from the surrounding tissue. That's the difference. We'll talk through a lot of the different tissues and organs though. So on these next two slides, we see all of the different components of the lymphatic system. First off, we said it includes lymph, right? This fluid that's really similar to blood, and it includes all of these lymphocytes that cluster in there. All these green lines that you see here, these are the lymphatic vessels. So they just go right alongside our veins. Like they flow just like blood vessels would, all throughout the periphery, all throughout the body. And every once in a while, you'll see these little balls? Those are lymph nodes. So they're like little filters and like little clusters of immune system cells. So we take this fluid, right, all this interstitial fluid from the body, we run it through the lymphatics or the lymph vessels, and eventually it gets run through a lymph node. And essentially that screens the fluid to check for pathogens. Filters out bad stuff and it says, okay, is this fluid okay? If it's not, if there's a pathogen, then you know somewhere downstream you have an infection going on, and that's where you need to go fight it. So essentially we just filter and clean out this fluid. It flows through these green vessels, through the lymph nodes, and then eventually it gets dumped back into the subclavian right there, both sides. You'll notice that the lymph nodes are clustered in specific areas. They're everywhere, but we have more lymph nodes present in the neck area, in the underarms, and in the groin and pelvic area, which kind of makes sense, right? I'm collecting a bunch of fluid from my arm, and it's coming up. I gotta really screen it before I dump it into circulation. Same thing, I've got all this fluid that's coming up from my legs. I gotta really screen it here in my inguinal area and pelvic area before it comes through. Really screen it before it comes down. So they're kind of clustered in those areas for a reason. Also, you see the spleen. The spleen is right over here in the right upper quadrant. It's a super, super delicate organ. We'll talk about why that is in a little bit. The thymus right here, kind of like right behind the top of your sternum or your manubrium. The thymus rivers where T cells go to develop and mature. And then we have something called MALT, mucosa-associated lymphoid or lymphatic tissue. So this is associated with all of the mucosas, all of the tracts. So the GI tract, the respiratory tract, the reproductive tract, the urinary tract, because these are all entry points for pathogens, right? Our skin's a great barrier, but our skin is not complete. We have holes, and holes are where the pathogens get in, right? So into the urethra, the urinary tract, into the vagina, into the anus, into the mouth, into the nose, into the eyes, like all of these open areas, we have extra lymphoid tissue because that's where the pathogens are coming in. This is just showing you the bottom, just the vessels that are going through the legs. And then again, you'll see that we've got clusters of lymph nodes present at the inguinal area and then also around the pelvic area. functions of the lymphatic system. We've kind of talked about all of this a bit, but one, to aid in the production of lymphocytes. So the lymphocytes, remember we start making them in the marrow, right? All of our blood cells we start making in the bone marrow. But one specific type of lymphocyte leaves the marrow and goes to mature in the thymus. Remember we said that that was the T cell. T cell is literally standing for thymus dependent. It's dependent on the thymus. So the T cell will leave the bone marrow and go to the thymus in order to mature. Okay, so that's an important function of the lymphatic system. It's also important in draining the excess interstitial fluid and returning it to the blood. Remember, again, 3.5 liters of blood gets filtered out and not reabsorbed every day. We can't leave that fluid in the interstitial fluid. Right? We have to have that blood volume. So it's the interstitial fluid that's responsible for pulling that fluid up and then dumping it back into the subclavian to maintain blood volume. That also helps to kind of get rid of pockets of really high concentrations of anything like ions or nutrients or wastes, because we're constantly flushing that interstitial fluid up and then redistributing it. So there's always this kind of flushing action that occurs so that the interstitial fluid isn't just sitting. And that helps to again, decrease these pockets and make sure the composition stays pretty regular. Finally, the lymphatic system is important for immunity. We already mentioned that the lymph, this fluid goes through lymph nodes, and as it goes through the lymph nodes, we filter it out. Right? We take almost all, like over 99% of pathogens get filtered out at the lymph nodes. And we also have the ability to activate the immune response. Okay, because without the lymph nodes, the interstitial fluid's just sitting there, and those pathogens might not come in contact with immune system cells for quite a while. So you can have an infection that really, really starts to fulminate, like to get really bad. But if you're pulling that fluid up and you're running it through a node, you're going to alert those immune system cells. You're going to run it past every type of immune system cell that you could as it goes through that lymph node. So you're going to alert the immune system to the fact that we have an infection a lot quicker because of these lymph nodes and the lymph flow. All right, 10 minutes. So I just want to cover a little bit about lymphatic vessels, and that'll get us into the real meat of the lecture next time. So we said that lymphatic vessels are just vessels that carry lymph. Lymphatic vessels start with the smallest vessels, which are, again, capillaries. Right? Lymphatic capillaries are the smallest lymph vessels, just like blood vessels. Capillaries are the smallest. We also call them terminal lymphatics. The reason we call them terminal lymphatics is because, remember I said they start as pockets. So they terminate. They have a terminal end where they actually end. Again, very different from blood vessels because of that. So when we look at our lymphatic vessels and lymphatic capillaries, we see that they're different from blood vessels in a few different ways. One, we just mentioned, they start as pockets, not as tubes. When we look at blood, we have an arterial, then we have our capillary bed, and then we have the venule. There's no end. Again, we call it the circulatory system because it's a circuit. There is no end to it. It goes around and around and around. The lymphatic vessels start as these terminal pockets. And this is how they begin. They also tend to have larger diameters than the capillaries, the blood capillaries do, and thinner walls. The reason they can have thinner walls is because they have to deal with less pressure. We do not have anything that's equivalent to the heart pushing this lymph forward. So there's not nearly as much pressure allowing the lymph to go forward, so the vessels can be really weak and kind of floppy. They don't need to be strong like blood vessels do. Finally, they have an irregular outline on section view. So if we were to section vessels and you look at an artery and then you look at like a normal capillary and then you look at a lymphatic capillary, you will see the difference in the shape of the lymphatic capillary. It has such thin walls that it gets really like floppy. So here we have a few important things to point out. So you see this is a blood vessel, right? I see my red blood cell in there, that's how I know, and it's red. But so this is a blood vessel. And remember when we look at this capillary exchange, well, I know it's a capillary because how many layers does it have? One, right? Does not have a tunica media with muscle, does not have a tunica externa. It just has this simple squamous cell, or endothelial cell. So when I look at capillary exchange that's happening here, remember I push some stuff out and then I pull it back in, right? Filtration and reabsorption. But I end up pushing more fluid out than I pull in. So I've got this extra fluid that builds up in the interstitial fluid. As this fluid builds up, it starts to create this pressure, right? More and more fluid, more and more pressure, pushes, pushes, pushes. And eventually, we push the fluid into the lymphatic capillaries. Again, you'll notice the lymphatic capillaries start as pockets. They are not tubes. So all of these little terminal pockets are going to start collecting interstitial fluid, and the interstitial fluid will slowly make its way up, and the capillaries will join together to make a larger lymphatic vessel, just like the blood vessels, right? They join and they get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger as they head back towards the subclavian. Also, I want you guys to look really quick. We'll talk about this in a second. But if you look here, notice these cells. See how this cell and this cell overlap each other? We have these weird little overlaps that occur in the cells that line our lymphatic capillaries. It's those little overlaps in the cells that will allow fluid in but won't let it out. They act as little one-way valves, so that when the pressure increases, this fluid can enter in, but, because look, if I push in, I'll push this back, right? Like over here, and I can enter. But if I try and push the opposite way, I can't open that, right? Because this is right in the way. So it acts like a little one-way valve. Oops. Again, this is what I was just showing you. When we look at lymphatic capillaries, we see that the cells that are lining them have a little bit of overlap between them. And that overlap allows or acts like a one-way valve. It allows fluid in, but it does not allow it to exit out back into the interstitial fluid. Okay, so we're always just allowing fluid, solute, bacteria, whatever, to enter into the lymphatic vessel, and then it's forced to continue forward as the vessels join and get bigger and bigger and bigger. We just said that the lymphatic capillaries will join to make larger and larger and larger lymphatic vessels. These vessels also have a bunch of one-way valves present. They have very frequent valves. And again, that's because these lymphatic vessels, remember, don't have all that pressure. There's no heart pumping the lymph forward. So the lymph is flowing forward, just very, very, very little pressure pushing it. So frequently we'll see that there are little valves to ensure that once it goes forward a little bit, it never goes backwards. Once it goes forward a little bit, it doesn't go backwards. And that keeps everything flowing forward. Again, they're going to travel through, the vessels will just travel through the body along with the veins, and eventually they'll head towards the trunk. There's a few things on this slide that I want you guys to recognize. This is showing you the actual vessel. See this swelling right there, how it gets wide right there? That's where there's a valve. So when you look at these lymphatic vessels from the outside, it looks, they call it beaded. Like, you know, with beads, when you have beads on a string, how they get wide where the bead is, and then thin. So it's wide where the bead is, and then it's thin. They have this beaded appearance where they go in and out. And everywhere that they get wide, it's because there's this, you can kind of see the dark line right there. There's this one-way valve present. Here we're showing it on section. So on section, you can see how it has a really thin wall. Right? We don't have the multiple layers present, and how when you section it, it has a really irregular view, or irregular shape, just because of that really thin wall. Here you can see the lymphatic vessel flowing alongside the blood vessels, and then looking at it, I just want you to notice again these one-way valves. Right? They're very, very frequent. And that, again, gives the vessels this beaded appearance where they get wide and then thin, and then wide and then thin. So when we look at the lymphatic vessels, we can classify them into these really big, broad categories. We can say that the vessels are either superficial lymphatics or deep lymphatics. See, that's kind of self-explanatory, right? The superficial lymphatics are the vessels that are really superficial. They're going to collect lymph from the skin, from the mucous membranes, so like in the mouth, the vagina, the mucous membranes lining the GI tract, essentially all of our respiratory tract, all of the tracts. And then the serous membranes. Remember those line the body cavities. So like the pleura, the peritoneum, and the pericardium. So the superficial lymphatics will collect lymph from all of these superficial areas, and they actually meet up with the deep lymphatics. The deep lymphatics are deep. So they take the lymph from all of the deeper areas in the body. So all the muscles, all of the organs, everything that's down deep, from the neck, the trunk, the arms, the legs, all the deep stuff goes into the deep lymphatics. And then again, you'll see that these actually merge. So the superficial vessels and the deep vessels will merge and they form lymphatic trunks. And then the lymphatic trunks, I'm not gonna ask you this stuff, you guys. And then the lymphatic trunks empty into two really, really big collecting ducts. Okay, these two collecting ducts right here are what are actually going to enter into or dump into the subclavian veins. So we have superficial and deep. They merge together to give us our big trunks. The trunks all come together and they give us the ducts. The ducts go into the vessels. I will only ask you about this. Right? And I'll have like the next page, like which one clears what. But I'm not going to ask you the whole, like, these two slides are the important ones. So the right lymphatic duct is one of our really big lymphatic vessels, and it collects lymph from the right side of the body, okay, so above the diaphragm. So like if you draw a line right here, all the way down to my diaphragm. So the right arm, the right chest, the right neck, right face. And then it dumps it into the right subclavian vein underneath the clavicle. The thoracic duct is an even larger duct. And when we look at the thoracic duct, you'll see it has like this piece that goes down the abdomen and it expands at the bottom. This really wide part of the bottom is called the cisterna chili. The cisterna chili down like this area collects lymph from the abdomen, the pelvis, and the legs. Okay, and then the top portion of the thoracic duct collects it from the left side of the body. Okay, so overall, the thoracic duct is going to collect from the left side above the diaphragm and everything below the diaphragm. Okay, because everything below the diaphragm comes up, comes into the cisterna chili. The cisterna chili goes up into the thoracic duct. Okay, then all of the left stuff comes down and over to the thoracic duct. So the right lymphatic duct is smaller. There's more fluid going into the left subclavian via the thoracic duct. Let's just look at this and then what we got for the day. So these are showing you in green, these are the lymphatic vessels, right? This is the subclavian vein where we're actually going to be dumping the lymph. So here, everything from above the diaphragm, over here, this is right, all of this area, comes and it ends up dumping into right here, this right lymphatic duct, which goes into the right subclavian. Over here, this is showing you the thoracic duct. If you look, it's got these parts that go over like this, that collects everything from up here, but it also has this big section that comes down right here with this expanded part called the cisterna chili. Okay, the cisterna chili, remember, gets everything from the abdomen and the legs, so everything from the rest of the body is going into the thoracic duct. I've kind of put everything in red that I want you to focus on. Okay? Hang on, if you have lab tonight, give me 1 second. Let me check my phone.